Okay, everybody, welcome to the week two session. This is the first of two sessions we'll hold this week. Today's session is mostly going to focus on the issues that you should have already started watching in the class discussions for this week. The first one is this discussion called How to Separate Fact and Fiction, where you have to watch this short video by Markham Nolan, which I think is a really interesting video, by the way. We'll talk about it in just a few seconds. And then after you watch the video, to consider the following questions that are posted for you. Have you ever questioned anything that you've seen in a news source, and so on? Do you think it's difficult to determine credibility of the stuff that you find either online or on the television? And the class discussion board has already started moving. I'm happy to see that people posted. By the way, let me give a reminder. Let me see if I can go back to the main activities page. You've probably noticed that there are certain discussions every week, but they're not weighted, meaning that there's no grade for them. But there is kind of, because I do fully expect people to participate in the discussion boards, even when they're so-called not graded. Just because there is a professionalism grade at the end of the month, which is worth 10% of your overall grade. And if you start skipping unweighted assignments because it's, oh, who cares, it's not worth anything, you get a few points taken off. Like you get like 5 points taken off professionalism. So it's important to be entering the discussion boards and posting something kind of thoughtful, not just, one or two sentences to simply mark that you've done it. But, it would take, I don't know, all of 20 to 30 minutes of your time to watch the 15-minute video and post something thoughtful like a medium-ish paragraph or something. So be aware of that. Here are the discussion boards, by the way. I like this one on the TED Talk video. By the way, I like the TED Talk videos. You'll watch about 3 or 4 of them this month, and they're usually pretty short. They run about 10 to 15 minutes typically, but they usually zero in on something that's pretty relevant and timely and interesting. So as you can see, people have already posted to the board. And I'll jump in the discussion as soon as I can as well. And then there's another one where you're supposed to find an example of an article online and evaluate it along the lines of what are called the 10 C's, which is found in an article that you need to read. It's basically 10 ways to determine whether something's credible or not. And you can see some people have jumped in already as well. I've posted an example here too. So just be aware that there are discussions that you do need to be participating in, because even though they're not officially graded, you do get credit for doing them. Okay, let's turn our attention to what I want to talk about this week, which is really all about researching credible sources, or to borrow the phrase from the TED Talk video, how do you separate fact from fiction online? Oh, someone has his hand up. Oh, okay, thanks guys. I forgot to click show my screen. And if I had been paying better attention to the chat room, I would have noticed. I'm not going to show everything again, but the important thing was that, let's see, that you do have these discussions like 2.2 and 2.3 that are unweighted, but it's important to engage in them and participate, because if you don't, you can lose some points. Visually there, I wasn't really showing very much, so we didn't lose much there. It just must have been tremendously boring to listen to me talk with a blank screen going on. Okay, but everybody can see my screen now, right? So, yeah, let's talk about how to research credible sources, or to borrow language from the TED Talk, how to separate fact from fiction online. And here's what we'll go over today. We'll discuss the whole issue of credibility online and how to determine whether something is credible or not. Then we'll get into the first half of this week's required activities, which is the debate you're all going to be participating in. Thursday is when we're going to save space for me to talk more in detail about the larger assignment that's due Sunday. But for this session, I just want to talk a bit about the teams you've been put into, because I'm sure you have a lot of questions, and I swear I'll go over just about every aspect of it if people are confused. I'll also give you a sneak preview that because we're hosting tonight's go-to session now instead of last night, I'm even going to extend the dates on the debate assignment by 1 day, so people don't feel like time is crunched. Like here we are talking about the assignment on a Tuesday, and you only have until Thursday to get it done. So we'll kind of It's kind of like turning back the clock an hour. We'll be turning back the calendar by a day, so the teams can communicate with one another, get it done. When we get to the assignment, I'll show you. It's not tremendously difficult, but what's expected of you, but it does require some coordination between the team members, and that's probably what takes the most time. Okay, so let's talk about first the TED Talk video, though. Right, this guy here. Oops. Markham Nolan. Did most of you have? How many of you have watched the video already? It's like this 15-minute thing. Okay, Nick hasn't. Okay, it looks like a couple of you have. I think, when do you have? Let me get away from this for a second. When do you have to complete this assignment until closes on the 17th? Which is what? What date is that? So that's what, like a Saturday or Sunday or something? Saturday, I think. So I mean, these discussion boards don't end completely. They're open for most of the week. So don't feel bad if you haven't watched it yet, though I will encourage you to try to watch it. Again, it's not very long. It's like 15 minutes. Anyway, I'm not going to summarize the entire thing, but the gist of it is that the way that we get information is completely changed. It's definitely completely changed since I was a kid, because as I discussed in, I think, the very first lab session, I'm old enough to remember a time where there were only 3 channels to choose from, right? We didn't have cable, which when cable did come along, by the way, in the early 80s in my neighborhood in Chicago, like there were, I don't know, 40 or 50 channels, not like the 100 or 200 that we have now. But now it's not just cable or satellite, it's also the internet. We just get this constant stream of information. And we get information even when we don't want information. Our phones keep buzzing and ringing with updates and tweets and stuff like that. You log in your Facebook page just because you want to say hi to a friend or like something that he or she has written, and you get all these dedicated streams that are hitting you with things because Facebook's able to read what your interests are, and so it sends you dedicated information. So it seems like we're just hit with information, which in a way is good. I mean, it's awesome to have information in your fingertips. It's awesome to be able to look up any factoid within seconds, right? Haven't you ever been in that position where, like, you're up in the middle of the night because you can't remember a certain fact or a certain person's name, or who was that guy who played that role in that movie, and it can drive you crazy unless you figure out the answer. And maybe it doesn't drive people crazy anymore, because now within 2 seconds you can find out the answer. In the old days, you just sit up all night torturing yourself about something so stupid. But we have information so quickly. We can get addresses. We can get phone numbers for restaurants that we want to order from. We can do this. We can check that in 2 seconds. The downside of it, of course, is that there's so much information that we're in this unique position of having to separate fact from fiction. Josh says, aren't factoids false? No, I think factoid is just a way of saying bits of information, like random pieces, random facts, rather than facts in general. But the downside of so much information is we now have to sort through it. This was always an issue, but it was less of an issue, as Markham Nolan says, back in the day, because people weren't as involved in the process as much. Right? News organizations, for example, had all day to work on a single newscast that they would then present to you at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m., what have you, and report to you on the news of the day. And by that time, facts could have been established to a certain degree so that they could reliably give you what they knew at the time. But here, where we could just get a constant stream of information hitting us as it happens, right? What happens at 11 a.m. could be completely false concerning a big story, versus what happens just a few hours later when the story is updated at 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. Add to this, what Markham Nolan kind of mentions, is that you now have people being involved, which on one hand is fantastic, because, hey, people can be a great source of information. Sometimes with their video cameras, with their phones, they can capture things that, you know, if you don't happen to have a news crew out there, people are able to capture it. That's awesome. What's not so awesome, though, is that when you add more, what's the phrase? More cooks in the kitchen, right? More chaos can ensue, and that's kind of what this TED Talk video is about. It's like, how do you separate order and fact and stability out of what can seem at times like just the general chaos of information hitting us? Nick says about discussion 2.3. Any article we can choose? Yes, any article. Uh, so I think I used a CNN article for my one, but you can grab anything. So it could be from the Huffington Post, it could be from the New York Times. It can actually, you know what? It can be from just about anything because there might actually be value in looking at something that maybe you do have questions about credibility wise. That might be even a more useful experiment. Um, yeah, maybe we'll talk about well in passing because I want to show an example from CNN about Robin Williams' death and how that's dominating the news and why that's dominating the news. But real quickly, before we get to some of that stuff, bringing it back to the TED Talk video, can anyone think of a time where, let me get this out of the way, can you think of a time where you either could not trust online information, or let's extend it to cable as well, like television? Now that our televisions are really, for the most part, almost extensions of the online world, not all of us, but a lot of us have HD televisions that are capable of connecting to the internet in some fashion or other. If not, still, satellite and cable have gone digital, and so we get those 200 channels of streaming information. But can you think of a time where you couldn't trust the information that you saw online or on television, or that you later found out the information wasn't genuine or true? Okay, James says Twitter feeds and Wikipedia. Okay, I think I confess that I don't tweet. So I don't keep up with that. But yeah, Wikipedia is a great example. Has anybody, I mean, you don't have to give a specific example, but have you ever been to a Wikipedia page where you just know that it's not very well written or it's not presenting very stable information, right? Because sometimes it does. Sometimes, and it depends what you're an expert in terms of your area, but sometimes you can tell it's written by someone who's just probably really, really knowledgeable, and thank God he or she is devoting their free time to a shared project like Wikipedia. But then there are other times where it's just awful. Like it's either completely biased or it feels like it was written by a 12-year-old, or it reads like a personal opinion essay rather than an encyclopedia entry. So yeah, there's a good example, right? Wikipedia has some good information, but has some terrible information too. So the best thing you can do is mostly stay away from it. It's fine for looking up quick facts. Like if you want to know how old, I don't know, Shakira is, you can go to Wikipedia and probably find it out. But for the most part, it's not really a reliable source. Someone else had something interesting. Chanda said, yeah, when Eva Mendes was pregnant with Ryan Gosling's baby. How did I miss that story? Was that a big story that got spread out there? Right? Internet rumors or whatever. You got that from Twitter. Okay, so there's some bad stuff out there. And by the way, Chanda, maybe you don't remember, but do you know how or why or when you found out it wasn't true? Justin Bieber, that's scary. So you guys know all this pop culture stuff a lot better than I do. I can my examples I'm going to give in just a minute are a bit more news-ish because I can't keep track of all these things. Okay, so here are my examples. Remember the Boston Marathon bombing happened? I don't know, a little over a year ago, probably about 15 months ago. A 200-million-year-old dinosaur hatched in Berlin Museum. Okay, so the tabloid stories. Okay, yeah, the Boston Marathon bombing. I don't know how well you can see it because I couldn't find a bigger image. I'm not bringing. I mean, I'm bringing up the Boston Marathon, but I'm not bringing it up in an insensitive way. This is a good example of what we're talking about news-wise. Let me see if I can blow up this picture. The New York Post decided to run with this photo called Bagmen. Feds seek this duel, pictured at a Boston Marathon. And it turns out the two people here photoed had nothing to do with the Boston Marathon bombing. So the New York Post, in its effort to want to... By the way, if you're not familiar with the New York Post, it doesn't quite have the reputation of the New York Times. Okay, this is tabloid journalism that kind of tries to pass for a newspaper. It's not as obvious in the sense of like... what are those famous tabloids? Why am I blanking on the names of them? You know the ones. These the ones you see in the grocery store counter that you can pick up and buy. The New York Post is maybe a little bit more serious than that. It is one of New York's major newspapers, but it's the one that has a bad tabloid reputation. And by the way, these two gentlemen here ended up suing the paper, right, for defamation and libel. But what happened here is the New York Post was so eager to get out a sensational headline that it ran with information that was not completely accurate. Or maybe the feds were really kind of wondering who these people are, but there was no suggestion that these two were the guys that people were looking for. But this spread like wildfire. I mean, when this picture hit, everybody was suddenly looking for these two guys pictured here. So there was an example of the news trying to get information so fast that if they had just waited a bit longer and verified things, this information wouldn't have gone out. This is pretty common. I shouldn't say pretty common, but it does happen from time to time with news agencies, especially when everybody's trying to get the story the fastest. But it seems to happen to certain places more than others. There are even like worse examples. Like if you go to Martin Luther King Jr.org, it sounds very fancy, right? .org, Martin Luther King. It seems, just to look at it, that it's a page dedicated to the man, historical writings, the King holiday, the Civil Rights Library. But if you look into it, it's actually a white supremacist website. I'm not going to go into any of the links just because I don't have much tolerance for flat-out ugliness. But here's like a website that disguises itself, trying to almost lure people in as being one thing, but it turns out that it's completely another. And, it doesn't even have to be this extreme, because I think most of us could, maybe if we accidentally came upon this site, sure, we might be fooled initially into thinking that it's a site that's dedicated in honorable memory of Martin Luther King, but we'd figure out pretty quickly when we start reading the stuff that's in here that it's pretty hateful and racist and wrong-headed. I mean, it wouldn't take much of a scholar to figure that out. But not everything has to be this extreme. So let's go back to the example of CNN. Okay, so where would you put CNN on a scale from 1 to 10? 1 meaning you just cannot trust it at all, to 5 meaning, it's okay, it's sometimes inaccurate, sometimes not, to a 10 meaning like this is rock solid journalism. Dinnermere says -5. I don't think I'm that harsh. Someone else said a 3. Yeah, I'm probably closer to Chanda or maybe James, like in that 6 to 7 category. It's too vanilla in its reporting, and it's also too brief in its reporting. When you click on any of these stories, they're not really in depth. They're not really very long. This is sort of the philosophy of the cable channel as well. You don't really go there to get in-depth reporting. You go there to get like quick hits of the news. And CNN stands for Cable News Network. It was like the first network of its kind about 25 years ago. It introduced the concept of 24/7 news. So yeah, I'd say, I don't know, CNN's probably in that 6-ish category. It's not god-awful, but it's not the place you want to be turning to. I mean, I will visit it sometimes every day just to see whatever like big stories have hit. And then if I'm interested in something, there are other publications that I read much more regularly that are much more in depth and actually will look at topics for, I don't know, with the same amount of depth as like a long short story would, or a long chapter from a novel. So that's not what you get from CNN. But it's interesting to know. Okay, Robin Williams is the main story here, right? Big news. I don't think any of us are surprised that that's kind of the main story. But why else would Robin Williams be the main story? I mean, yes, there's the emotional impact. He's a well-known figure. It's shocking to hear what happened to him. But if we're being a bit, I don't mean to say cynical, but if we're looking at this through the lens of scrutiny, why else would we run the Robin Williams story front and center, as it did last night, as it does today? Yeah, Nick pretty much nailed it. Views. Right? Because, I mean, CNN is basically, it's a little bit difficult to explain, but it generates some of its money through you clicking on the actual articles and reading them, because there are ads on just about every page. So news stories that can generate clicks or views, um, that's what CNN wants. So that's another big reason I'd say I'd put it in that kind of six-ish category, because other news services don't care as much about it. I think any news or publication, magazine, what have you, has to worry somewhat about views and readership, but some care about it really explicitly more than others. I hope that was a joke. Someone mentioned something about who is Robin Williams, right? You do know who Robin Williams is, don't you? Whoever asked that, Daniel. But yeah, okay. And I'm not going to be too cynical, but I'm going to guess that the Robin Williams story is going to also be a main thing tomorrow. It might disappear somewhat by Thursday, but they're going to run with this because it sounds terrible to say, but anytime a story like this happens, or tragedies, right? So the Boston Marathon bombing, Hurricane Katrina, that tsunami that happened in Southeast Asia about, what was it, like 8 years ago, nine or something, right? These stories dominate the headlines for like a week, and there's a reason for that. It's because whether you're watching it on television or whether you're reading it online, people want to keep you glued. And it's always weird. Yeah, someone mentioned Michael Jackson. It's always weird. It's not like I can also get caught up in big news events, and there is an addictive quality to paying attention. But there is a certain point where, after a day, I get sort of not just tired, but almost cynical. Like, you know that other events are going on in the world, but they're not being reported on, and that feels kind of strange. And so, yeah, I'm not saying that everything. I'm not saying CNN is devious, but um, if you look through a lot of their main stories, they're often kind of designed to sort of encourage clicks or views, and that's not uncommon. I'm not saying there's anything insidious or evil or wrongdoing about that, but it's one of the things you have to be aware of. And by the way, the credibility assignment, which is 2.3, the 2.3 assignment, where you have to find an article online and judge it, it's asking you to do a lot of these things. So it's asking you to, for example, to find an article and take a look at where it was published. And can you evaluate the quality of the place where it was published? The Martin Luther King page, which I thankfully just knocked down, if we scroll to the bottom there, we could see that the site was hosted by Stormfront. And if you do research into Stormfront, you'll find out it's this horribly racist, not quite secret because it's no longer underground, but it's this white supremacist organization that's pretty famous. It gets in the news a lot because it's so hateful. They have their own forum. So, looking into who's behind the site or who's behind the publication would help. It doesn't have to be as extreme as the MLK example, but just the evaluations we made about CNN, right? What can we guess about the quality of something based on the fact that it was published on CNN, or whatever publication the article you choose is from? The article should always have an author, okay? If it doesn't have an author, that should give you cause for not necessarily suspicion, but most reputable places are willing to give a name for the person who wrote it. Or even if it's a blog, usually there's a name, or there's an about me section, so you can find out more about who the writer is. That's pretty important information to know. So that 2.3 assignment is asking you to kind of go through that stuff. So the things we've been talking about. How do we check for credibility? Two important concepts are obviously content and author. What is the content and what does the content say, and who is saying it? Okay, so we've kind of walked through this step a little bit through the examples. It's also good to know like the types of organizations that exist out there. I'm going to just fly through this because most of you know this, but EDU means it's going to be education related. A lot of the times you can mostly trust what's here, though you have to be careful because sometimes it could be just an undergraduate student who has web space under his or her university's profile, and that's why it ends in EDU. So it doesn't mean it can be trusted outright. .com, as we know, are business or commercial related sites. .gov, of course, relates to the government, which is great for official government materials like studies, facts, research. It's probably less great in terms of getting thoughtful, independent, in-depth articles on actual things, but it's great if you need like raw materials on basic facts. .org is a non-profit related site, though you have to be careful because even though .org sometimes can communicate a sense of independence, right? It's not a profit. That Martin Luther King page was a .org. Okay, there are a lot of ugly .orgs out there. There are a lot of politically linked .orgs because we're getting up to 2014 with the midterm elections in November. So we have lots of either, liberal-leaning Democratic sites or right-leaning conservative sites that have their information up online, often disguised as being factual or purely objective, but they clearly have bias. But often they're .orgs. And be aware just of the general page types that are out there, like personal pages. These can sometimes be okay in terms of quality. I mean, there are examples of bloggers out there that are really brilliant and are dedicating their free time to kind of sharing information. But for the most part, you should be suspicious of personal pages. Or not suspicious, but you should know that on its surface, it's probably not something you would, for example, want to cite or quote. As smart as I think I am, I don't have a blog, by the way, but if you did come across a blog that I had written, you probably shouldn't even trust my information without knowing who I am, what my background is. Special interest pages, professional pages, news magazine pages. This is where we tend to get a lot of our information. Commercial pages, and I'll just quickly say you have to be careful about those too, because there's so much misinformation online that one of the tricks now is to sort of present information one way when it's really another. So the Martin Luther King example is an instance of that, right? It tries to pretend on its surface like it's a site that's created in honor to the man, but it's exactly the opposite. You'll also have pages that seem like on its surface that they're purely informational or that it's an article, but then you read on and you find out it's just someone shilling for a specific product. So be aware of these sorts of things. I don't think it's a matter of always being cynical. I don't like this issue of distrusting everything, because then you can almost enter into sort of conspiracy theory mode where you don't believe anything that you read. So, for example, there's probably some crazy person out there who doesn't think Robin Williams died, or thinks he was murdered, or has some conspiracy theory, or this is all I don't like that kind of cynicism, but I like an intelligent mixture of you using your own brains, your own brain power, combined with a healthy dose of skepticism to determine what's trustworthy and what's not, either online or on television. But just flat out ruling out everything, I think, can be equally as dangerous. And the last kind of common sense thing is to look at the date when something was written. How old is the information? For example, a story might have been updated more recently. So date could apply literally if you're looking at a story that was posted at 11 a.m., but there's new information that was later posted at 3 p.m. Or it could be much more severe than that. When if you're writing a research paper, and you won't write any long research papers at Full Sail, but you will write short papers that require research. And if you're looking into a specific topic in your field, it's probably more useful. For example, let's say you're writing on something related to the music industry or the gaming industry. Probably it's better to find something that was published in 2011, 2012, 2014 than something that was published in 1996. Josh has a good point here. He is taught not to use anything older than 2 or 3 years old. I think that's a pretty good general rule. I think there are obviously exceptions. Sometimes it's important to look at old information because the information presented in it isn't really dated. For example, if a powerful thinker made a really brilliant insight in 1964, I don't see any problem necessarily in quoting him, but obviously you wouldn't quote something from 1985 about, I don't know, new technology, because that would look just kind of embarrassing. What about Prensky's article? Well, there's a good case, Nick, because I'm glad you brought that one up, because we talked about this last time. I specifically asked, what about Prensky? His article is old, so why are we still teaching it? Is it because we're out of date? Should we be updating our reading list, or does the article still seem relevant? I make the case, I think, you don't have to believe me, but to me the information is still relevant. And I used a special word last time. I called it prescient. Prescient just means it has this ability to almost predict the future. So here's a guy who was writing in 2001 when the internet was already up and running, and we there was still a healthy dose of information to be found online, but we hadn't yet entered this world of information overload, and yet his ideas still seem pretty accurate for 2014. So no, that's fine, Nick. Actually, I am glad that you brought that up, because I think that's a good example where, let's say you were writing a paper on this issue of, how digitally adapt people are. I don't think there would be any problem, for example, quoting or citing from that Prensky article, which, by the way, is like super famous. So it's not just an old article; it's sort of like this groundbreaking article that got a lot of attention. And so articles like that, I think, are important to always refer to and read and stuff. Okay, people are getting into avocados and. Okay, let's change the topic then. That's the gist of it. So use a combination of brain power and healthy skepticism to determine what you can trust online. Let's talk about this week's assignment. Okay, so there are two things to work on this week. Kind of like last week. Remember last week there was a lighter assignment, the digital identity discussion, and then there was the bigger assignment, the DGO list, the DGO inspired assignment, which, by the way, I'm still making my way through both those assignments. This week is kind of similar. So there's one assignment that's a little bit lighter. It's a debate-based activity. And then there's a large assignment that's due Sunday. But all of you have been placed into one of three groups. Okay? And you should have seen my announcement already. How many of you saw the announcement and know what team you're in? I assume that you guys also go to your envelope to click on to read my announcements. So I sent out an announcement earlier today, placing each of you into teams. It looks like most of the people here know what team they're in. That's good. But if people need a reminder, it's right here. So okay, so Team A, for example, Antonio, Garrett, Bernard, Quest, etc. Team B, Team C. So a couple of the people here present are in Team C, right? Chanda's in Team C, Daniel's in Team C. So that's cool. You could even sort of reach out to one another now. I mean, maybe not literally now, or you could, but try to pay attention to what I'm saying as well. O'Shane is here too. So it looks like there are three people from Team C here. But once you identify what team you're in, the first step you should do is communicate with your other group members. Okay? You can do that either through the FSO system by sending a message. Again, I don't see how things work on your end. I assume there's a way you can message one another by clicking on the People tab up above and maybe clicking on someone's photo and then sending them a message. Or you can just use the... gosh, I keep bringing up PowerPoint and I keep having to go away from it. Or you can just use the space on the activities page. For example, let me bring it up. Each of you, Team A, Team B, Team C, have dedicated discussion boards. So, for example, Team A's discussion board is here, Team B, Team C, right? So you have this space to also post in and share ideas and bounce things back and forth. Basically, you can determine however you need to communicate with one another. The important thing is that you do communicate. So if you want to communicate in some sort of non-FSO platform way, that's fine. If you want to send each other traditional emails, hey, that's great. If you have another, I don't know how you'll do it. If you want to exchange Facebook information and create a specific group under Facebook to post information, you can do that. Most people, I think, use a combination of private messaging and the actual discussion boards to share information. James says, are we able to just post in the Team B activity page? What do you mean by just post? Because I'm going to explain what you need to literally do for the assignment. And these individual... I'm trying to read the chat. These individual boards are basically your workspace. So I'm not really going in here and grading what you're doing in here. So Nick says, will someone in Team B get dock points for not posting? No. Team A space is Team A space. Team B space is Team B space. You'll basically be working within your groups kind of on your own. And then when you're finished with your project, you're going to send it directly to me. And actually, let me get back to explaining what you're literally doing, because that will help wrap up a lot, I think, answer a lot of these questions. Okay, so here's the assignment sheet. The important stuff is kind of on page 2. That's why I've already skipped there. But your goal is to look at this statement, which is here on the right of page 2. Technology, so technology through television, texting, social networks, or the internet, has contributed to an increase in literacy skills. Okay? So that's a statement that all of you are working from. That technology in all these forms has contributed to an increase in literacy skills. Okay, so Team A is going to support that statement. Okay, so Team A is going to basically agree with that statement. Team A is going to try to set out by researching, so either using online sources, or I believe this week's session should have introduced you to the basics of the Full Sail Library Research Database. So using the database or online, you need to head out and support why you think the statement is true. So Team A is pretending that technology is great for people's increase in literacy skills. Team B is doing the opposite. Team B is going to treat this statement as basically false. Team B is going to try to prove that technology has had a negative impact on people's literacy skills. Josh is saying his personal experiences as a valid source. Yes and no. I mean, yes, in the sense that you can feel free to include it, but no, in the sense that that on its own can't be the only example. This is an exercise again in heading out into the world, well, the online world, and finding information that helps make your case. Okay, so you're going to do research into this, and doing research requires you to basically to practice the skills we've talked about. What kind of sources seem credible? What kind of sources don't? So Team A is supporting the statements. Team B is disagreeing with it. Team C, they should still be communicating and meeting, but their role kind of comes in a little bit later, because teams A and B, you're supposed to have until Thursday at midnight, but I'll give you until Friday at midnight to produce your statements. Okay, so you'll go ahead and do your research. I recommend using Digo and bookmarking whatever you find in Digo, because you're going to need to provide your links eventually anyway. So if you can do it in Digo, that's probably the easiest way to do it. But once you've talked among each other, once you've gone out and find things that you think support your stance, you're going to write up a statement. Okay? Yeah, Nick, it's one statement per team. So, and I'm going to give some tips on how you might want to divvy up team member duties in a second. But yeah, there's one statement from the group. And a statement is usually, 3 paragraphs or something. Some people write as few as 2, some people write as many as 4, but in that kind of ballpark, all right? So a nice page to page and a half statement. So you'll have a group statement. You'll put names of contributing team members. And let me stress that, contributing team members. Okay? I mean, I do a good job of keeping up with the teams and trying to get reports from them. But if there are members of your team who aren't participating or who have not responded to your messages that you sent them, don't feel pressure to put their names on the statement when you hand it in, okay? Because this isn't an exercise in 3-4 people do the work and other people ride along and get a free grade, because this is a graded assignment. And if people complain down the road, that's fine. They'll deal with me. I've done it before. I've had people say, "Wait a second, I was on the team. I participated," because they came in at the 11th hour and wrote like a single sentence on the discussion board. Yeah, Nick. Actually, that's a good piece of advice about electing someone to make the final statement. Yeah, I think you should do that. I'll say more about that in a second. Okay, so teams A and B, you have until Friday at midnight. Okay, I know the assignment sheet says Thursday, but I'll give you until Friday at midnight to produce your statements, to conduct your research, and produce your statement with team members' names and also the links to whatever articles, research, videos that you found. And then I'll pass on the statements to Team C. And then Team C, I'll give you until Tuesday. Okay, it says Monday, but I'll give you until Tuesday at midnight to basically look at both Team A and Team B's work. And then you'll provide your own statement where I don't want to put it in terms of winners or losers, but you'll basically be picking whichever team you think made a stronger case for the statement. Um, okay, and you're basically kind of the judge here, and you have until Tuesday night to decide. Again, there's no winners or losers. Um, but the point here is that once I get Team C's statement, I'll kind of share the results for everybody to know. And the same thing applies to Team C. You'll have your group statement, team members, links to any articles, research that you did to help you make your decision. Um, so that's the gist of it, I think, for the assignment. It's actually not that difficult. The hardest part is probably organizing among yourselves, but this is something you should get used to because most of you, especially in 2014, are heading into fields where you'll often have to work with people, not just in the office or face to face, but in other ways as well, sharing documents through Google. Musicians, I mean, my gosh, musicians often work sometimes on opposite ends of the country or on opposite continents, sending each other their part of the song, and then someone puts it all together. Um, so this is a good exercise in that. Okay, back to my PowerPoint thingy. Okay, you've been praised in groups. It's important that you start communicating right now. So I think someone, Joshua, maybe freaked out that he's the only member of Team A here. That's fine, but I would say because you've attended this session, maybe you could spearhead reaching out to the others in your group, like sending them a group message maybe when this session is over. Um, Already done? Okay, awesome. And let me know. I'll also send reminders out to the teams. But like, I need to know if for some reason nobody is responding. Usually it's not that bad. Um, I don't think I've ever had a case where like there's only one person in a group who's doing something. Give people time. They may just not have woken up to the fact that they're in a group. Okay, I've already explained this. All three groups are dealing with this statement. Okay, here are my tips. You might collectively decide who will cover what in your group. You don't have to do this, but you might want to break things up. Um, so in Team A, for example, you might want to have someone scour the research databases while someone else scours online, or you might want to find one person who works on one aspect of the question. Remember, it's asking you to examine internet intelligence, social media postings, the texting, those sorts of things. You might want to divvy it up by type. You could ask someone to look into the issue of social media and its impact on literacy. Another person could look into texting and its impact. You don't have to do things that way, but there's a suggestion. As I already mentioned, use the FSO discussion board devoted to your team to communicate. I think you should try to be communicating in other ways as well, because you can, even though our FSO system, which you guys probably don't know this, but we just changed it a couple months ago. Before, we didn't have this sort of Facebook-style notification system where you have little numbers appearing above an envelope to let you know that you have a message waiting. But still, it requires someone to be logging into the FSO system. So you should maybe have ways to communicate with each other outside of FSO, but certainly use the FSO discussion board as much as you want. And that's kind of my other point here, which is feel free to use other communication skills, instant message, so on. Use the tools that we've learned. So Digo, taking screenshots. I'll actually literally talk about how to take one on Thursday, but I think most people know how to take a screenshot, right? I have a Mac, so it's different on a Mac, but I think on a PC it's just hitting, isn't it something as simple as like hitting the print screen button? Yeah, and if you're using a tablet or something, or then the screenshot thing is pretty simple. But use computer tools to keep track of your research, because you'll need to provide the links when you hand in your statement. And then, as someone mentioned, I can't remember who, Nick, I think, you might choose one person, maybe two, particularly someone who's a strong writer, to produce the group's written statement. In this class, I don't take off massive points for grammar. It's mostly I look for the egregious, meaning serious mistakes that are made, like when people don't capitalize the first letter in the opening word of a sentence, or people are just writing in text speak, or they're not putting in periods, or they're just completely misspelling words. Those are sort of the big issues I look for. But still, there are points awarded to grammar. So you might want to pick the strongest writer of the group to produce your statement. And leave enough time for other group members to read the written statement and provide feedback. So, yeah, if people get moving now, figure that maybe you have a day or two to conduct the research, and then maybe you devote the final day, Friday, to preparing the statement, getting feedback from your team members, and polishing it up to the best of your ability before you send it to me. And by the way, that's all you have to do. Like, I would recommend creating a Microsoft Word document, either through Microsoft Word, or if you don't have Word installed on your computer, there are tools like Google Docs or Microsoft OneDrive that will allow you to create a doc file online, and just send me that. Okay, so two, three, four paragraph statement with each team member's name on it and every link that you use to help you produce the statement, and just get it to me. You don't have to post it to the board or anything like that. Okay, I'm not gonna go over this. I just did, right. Make sure everything's included. Make sure that you're submitting a statement, people's names, links. That you need to email me or message me this stuff by. I should have fixed this because I've extended it a day. Right? I don't know. So that's Friday at midnight for Team A's and Team B, and Tuesday. And actually, this will be convenient, especially for Team C, because now that you have until Tuesday to work on it instead of Monday, it kind of gives you a little bit of breathing space, so you don't have this large assignment that's due Sunday hanging over you, and then you have this other thing that's due Monday. There's a little bit of time in between. Same thing for the people in Team A and Team B. I know it's pushed to Friday instead of Thursday, but it still gives you Saturday and all day Sunday if you need it to work on the assignment that's due for Sunday, so I don't think anybody's being too crunched. Okay. I know I flew through a lot of stuff as usual. Questions about anything? About how to determine credibility of sources you find online? About the misinformation debate? Or anything at all? Right, Nick. Just one statement defending your stance on the topic. So, Nick, you're in what? Team A? Team B. Okay, so you're arguing against that statement. Your team's job is to argue that texting, social media, Facebook, internet, television, that it's had a detrimental effect on literacy. Oh, and by the way, that should remind me, each team's going to have to define what literacy means in their mind. I mean, there's traditional literacy in the sense that learning how to read and write, and then there's like the bigger sense of literacy, like digital literacy. So your teams can play with that flexibility if you want when you were making your case for or against. Yeah, Chanda. Team C, your job is when I get the statements from Team A and Team B, I'm going to pass them on to Team C, and it's Team C's job to decide which one is best and why you chose it. And you might even have to do your own research to maybe look into who's doing the best job. James, what do you mean when you say can we take both into consideration? What team are you in, James? Oh, yeah, two types of literacy. Sure. So you're in Team B. You're going to be arguing against it. Yeah, you can. Yeah, definitely you can consider both sides. It might be more valuable. I'm not saying it's not valuable for Team B, but it might even be more valuable for Team A because lots of people like to criticize technology in terms of traditional literacy, right? Old people are like, these kids can't spell, or these kids can't do this, or they write in text speak. But one could always make the argument that literacy is more than just about that. But sure, if Team B can find a way to even, I don't know, discuss both sides of the issue, that literacy, whether in the traditional sense or the larger digital sense, is being hurt, yeah, go for it. Yeah, China, these hooligans. Did I mention this in another session? I said I can't remember if I said this last month or this month, but it's really about learning to speak like two languages. So I have no problem with text speak if you're literally texting someone, but you should know how to write in both forms. because if you can't, then it's gonna, I think, hurt you at some point. So it's not about one being right and one being wrong. It's about being fluent in both. I think that's good. It's always important to be flexible. Okay, so if people need to hang out to sort of send messages, if you don't know, there's a little thing at the bottom of your control panel, right below your chat. It should say to. And right now you're set to the entire audience. So if you post something, it's there for all of us to read. But if you click on it, you can actually choose individual people in the class session. That will allow you to send them a private message. So if you want to take advantage of that right now, you can. Or you can try to communicate with people offline. But people who think that they're good to go and don't have questions, I'm not going to hold you up. So thanks for attending. Good luck with your debates, and I'll be checking in to see how you're doing, okay? No, Josh, you'll be fine. Like I said, I've never had an instance where there's only one team member who's doing anything. I've had as few as 3 people. Like usually the list of team members is 6 or 7 people long. Sometimes I've had it reduced to there's only 3 people who are present and doing the work. But don't freak out yet. Remember, this isn't due until Friday, so hopefully your team members will respond by tomorrow. And if you have to do it by yourself, I don't know. We'll work something out. Maybe you'll get massive bonus points or something. Yeah, I'll hear you screaming all the way in Orlando if that happens. I'm going to stop the recording because people probably don't need to hear the random chit chat.